Alpha King Theron Valdris had never known fear. Not when facing 1,000 rogues, not when silver pierced his heart, not when his own father tried to murder him for the throne. But the broken whimper coming from his beta's quarters turned his blood to ice, and his wolf to something feral he no longer recognized. The midnight run had been good, clean. His paws had eaten up miles of forest floor, and the hunt had left him pleasantly exhausted, blood still singing with that primal satisfaction only a wolf understands. He'd shifted back near the east courtyard, pulling on the clothes he'd stashed there, ready for nothing more complicated than sleep. Then he heard it, a sound so small, so utterly hopeless, that any ordinary wolf would have missed it entirely. It threaded through the night like a dying breath, a whimper that shouldn't have reached him from this distance, through stone walls and closed doors. But something about that particular frequency of despair made his beast surge forward with a rage that defied logic. He moved before he could question it. The East Wing housed his senior warriors. Cain Ashford's quarters occupied the corner suite, a reward for 15 years of loyal service. Theron had attended Cain's mating ceremony 4 years ago, watched him bind himself to a quiet woman from a border pack. Pretty thing. Forgettable. She never spoke at gatherings unless spoken to, moved through rooms like smoke, kept her eyes down, and her opinions silent. Theron couldn't remember her name. Had he ever known it? The bathroom door stood cracked open. Steam curled into the corridor like beckoning fingers, and with it came that sound again, a wounded animal trying to be silent about dying. He should announce himself. Protocol demanded it. A king didn't creep through his beta's private quarters in the dead of night. He pushed the door wider anyway. She knelt on cold tile, water cascading over her hunched form from the shower above. At first he thought she was simply bathing. Then he saw her hands, the frantic scrubbing motion, the glint of something sharp catching the light. A broken piece of mirror. She was dragging it across her forearm with the methodical patience of long practice. The water swirling toward the drain ran pink. His wolf slammed against his controls so hard that Theron's vision flickered between human sight and the sharper colours of the beast. He gripped the doorframe, claws erupting from his fingertips without permission, and that small destruction of wood made her look up. Their eyes met. Hers were gold. Not the ordinary gold of a wolf catching light, not the amber that all their kind shared. This gold burned like sunrise through ancient amber, like fire given permission to think. Alpha gold, the colour of kings and queens, of bloodlines that shaped history. Impossible. Beta wolves didn't have eyes like that. Omega wolves certainly didn't. And this woman, Cain's meek, invisible wife, radiated power so suppressed it felt like standing next to a covered sun. She scrambled backward, crashing against the porcelain tub with a crack that made him wince. The mirror shard fell from her fingers. Her hands flew up to shield her face. And the motion revealed what the steam and her hunched posture had hidden. Scars, dozens of them. They crisscrossed her back like a roadmap of systematic torture, some white and old, some still holding the shine of recent healing. Welts bloomed across her ribs in parallel lines. Someone had beaten her with precision, with practice, and on her shoulder, where a mate mark should have been a source of pride and connection, there was only mangled flesh, burned, carved at. The scar tissue suggested someone had tried to remove the mark entirely, and when that failed, had attempted to destroy what remained. Please. Her voice came out rusted, barely a whisper. Please, he said I could shower. I wasn't wasting water, I swear. He said I could. Theron's wolf roared. The sound didn't leave his throat, but it filled his skull with such violence that his human thoughts scattered like startled birds. He didn't understand the reaction. He barely knew this woman. But every instinct his beast possessed had focused on a single thundering word. Mine. Get up! His own voice came out strange, thick with something between rage and reverence. Can you walk? She stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language, then Slowly, she nodded. Her movements were careful, pained. She moved like someone whose body had become an enemy, like she expected each motion to be punished. "Who did this to you?" The question was unnecessary. He already knew. The mate mark, the location of these quarters, the way she'd immediately started justifying the shower, as if hot water required permission. But he needed to hear her say it. She didn't answer. Instead, her eyes dropped to the tile and her shoulders curved inward as if trying to make herself smaller, invisible. A survival mechanism so ingrained it had become reflex. "Your name." He tried to gentle his voice, but the wolf made everything come out rough. "Tell me your name." "Serafina." Barely audible. "Sarah." The name hit him like cold water. Serafina. He hadn't heard that name in 12 years, not since the fall of the Moonfire Kingdom, not since Alpha King Fenris and his entire bloodline had been slaughtered in a single night of fire and betrayal. There had been a daughter. Everyone said she died with the rest. "Your father," Theron said slowly. "Who was your father?" She flinched as if he'd struck her. The gold in her eyes flared brighter, then dimmed, as if something internal had crushed that light back down. He could feel it now that he was looking for it. Magic. Dark, twisting magic wrapped around her like chains, pressing her wolf into a cage so small she could barely breathe. "I don't..." She shook her head. "I'm no one. I'm nothing. I'm Kane's. Please, please don't tell him I talked to you. Please, he'll..." Heavy boots in the corridor. They both froze. "Sarah?" Kane's voice carried through the steam, jovial and warm in a way that made Theron's stomach turn. The voice of a man among friends, a man who'd spent the evening drinking with his warriors, a man returning home to his property. "You better not be wasting hot water again." 3 seconds. Maybe less. Theron moved. He caught Serafina around the waist, felt her entire body go rigid with terror. Felt the instinctive surrender of someone who'd learned that fighting back only made things worse, and hauled her into the bedroom. The closet. He pushed her inside with more force than he intended, heard her swallow a cry of surprise, and then he was closing the door with a silent click. Back to the bathroom. He shut off the shower, grabbed a towel from the rack, and positioned himself in the corner where the steam still clung thickest. His claws hadn't retracted. He didn't try to make them. The bathroom door swung open. Kane Ashford stepped through, 6 feet of solid muscle, handsome face, easy smile. 15 years at Theron's side. 15 years of shared battles and strategy sessions and quiet trust. The smile vanished when he saw his king standing in the steam. "Theron." Kane's voice went carefully neutral. "I didn't realize you were..." "Where is your wife, Kane?" The question hung between them. Theron watched emotions flicker across his beta's face. Surprise, calculation, the briefest flash of something cold and possessive before masks fell into place. "Sleeping, I assume." Kane gestured vaguely toward the bedroom. "She tends to retire early. Is something wrong?" "I heard a sound. Coming from your quarters." "A sound? Like an animal dying?" Kane's jaw tightened. Just a fraction. Any other night, Theron might have missed it. "Sarah sometimes has nightmares. Trauma from childhood. I've told her to seek help, but she refuses. You know how stubborn she can be." Theron didn't know. He'd never exchanged more than formal greetings with the woman currently hiding in her husband's closet, trying to muffle her breathing. Probably expecting to be beaten for the crime of existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. "I'd like to speak with her." "Now?" Kane's laugh came out wrong, too sharp. "It's past midnight." "Now?" Silence stretched. Steam dissipated slowly, revealing more of the bathroom, the cracked tile near the tub, the pink tint in the grout that spoke of hastily cleaned blood, the mirror above the sink that had a piece missing from its corner. "Of course." Kane's voice had gone smooth, cooperative, dangerous. "Let me wake her. I'll do it." Their eyes met. Wolf to wolf. Alpha to beta. Kane's beast was strong, had always been strong, but it should have submitted instantly. That was the nature of pack hierarchy. The simple mathematics of power. Instead, Theron felt something push back. A resistance that had no business existing in the man who'd sworn him fealty. Interesting. Theron moved past him into the bedroom. The space was immaculate, almost sterile. No personal touches, no warmth, no evidence that a woman had lived here for 4 years. The bed was made with military precision. A single pillow rested against the headboard. One pillow. For a mated pair. The closet door stood closed. Theron felt Kane behind him, felt the weight of his beater's attention like a knife at his back, and made a decision that would reshape everything. He pulled open the door. Serafina huddled in the corner, arms wrapped around her knees, gold eyes blazing with terror. She'd found clothes, one of Kane's shirts, nothing else, and she looked so small surrounded by her husband's belongings that something in Theron's chest cracked open. "Hello, Serafina." He kept his voice soft, gentle, the voice he used with children and wounded animals. "I'm going to take you somewhere safe now." Kane moved, faster than a beta should be. But Theron was faster. His claws caught his commander across the chest, 4 parallel lines that opened flesh and sprayed blood across the pristine bedding. Kane staggered. His eyes flickered, human brown to something else, something that swirled with shadows and wrong colours. "Touch her again," Theron said quietly, "and I will forget we were ever friends." The thing looking out of Kane's eyes smiled with too many teeth. "You don't understand what she is," it said. "What she's worth. I've spent 4 years preparing her." Theron hit him again. Harder this time. Hard enough that Kane's head snapped back and his body crumpled. In the closet, Serafina made a sound, not fear, not relief. Something raw, something that might have been hope, if hope could sound like it was afraid of itself. Theron extended his hand toward her. "Come with me." She stared at his claws still wet with her mate's blood. Then she looked at his face, really looked for the first time, and whatever she saw there made a decision for her. Her fingers touched his palm. And somewhere deep in the castle, something ancient stirred. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 2. Theron didn't kill Kane in that bathroom. It took every ounce of control he possessed. Control forged through years of war. Through diplomatic negotiations that made him want to tear throats. Through the 1,000 small murders of impulse that kingship demanded. His wolf raged against the restraint, clawing at his insides with a fury that bordered on madness. But he didn't kill him. Instead, he watched Kane stir on the bedroom floor, watched those wrong-coloured eyes flicker back to ordinary brown, watched confusion replace that too sharp smile. The wounds on Kane's chest had already begun knitting together, faster than they should have, faster than any beta had the right to heal. "Theron?" Kane pressed a hand to his bleeding chest, genuine bewilderment in his voice. What happened?" The thing that had looked out of Kane's eyes was gone. In its place sat the man Theron had known for 15 years. Loyal, steady, perhaps a bit rough around the edges, but fundamentally decent. The contrast made Theron's skin crawl. "You attacked me." Theron kept his voice flat, confused. "I came to check on that noise and you just launched yourself at me, like you didn't recognize me." Kane looked at his bloody hands, at the ruined bedding, at the closet door hanging open. Something flickered in his expression. Calculation, worry, the rapid assembly of a story. The drinking. Gods, I must have had more than I thought. I've been having these blackouts lately, these moments where It's fine. Theron offered his hand, helped Kane to his feet. The contact made his wolf snarl. "We've all been there. I shouldn't have startled you." "Where's Sarah?" The question came too quickly, too sharp, for just a heartbeat. Something predatory flashed in Kane's eyes before the mask settled back into place. "Ran off when the fighting started," Theron shrugged. "Probably hiding somewhere, poor thing. She looked terrified." "She's fragile." Kane's voice carried a note of practiced concern. Delicate constitution. I've tried to help her, but she's never really recovered from her childhood trauma. Childhood trauma. The words sat in Theron's mouth like poison. He'd seen those scars, fresh welts across her ribs, the destroyed mate mark. That wasn't childhood trauma. That was systematic, ongoing torture. You should find her, Theron said. Make sure she's all right. Of course. Kane was already moving toward the door, his wounds nearly closed now. And Theron? I'm sorry about the attack, it won't happen again. I know it won't. Their eyes met. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, that the ground had shifted beneath their friendship, that whatever came next would be different from what came before. Kane left to hunt for his wife. Theron waited until those footsteps faded completely before he moved. The library. Serafina would need somewhere to hide, somewhere Kane wouldn't think to look, and in their brief exchange, he'd seen the intelligence burning beneath her fear. She'd know the castle. 4 years of invisibility meant 4 years of learning which shadows were safest. He found her exactly where he'd hoped, curled in the corner behind the ancient histories, a section Kane considered useless and therefore never visited. She'd found clothes somewhere, a servant's dress that hung too loose on her thin frame. Her gold eyes tracked his approach with the wariness of a wild thing. He's looking for you. Theron kept his distance, gave her space. I told him you ran when the fighting started. Why? The question surprised him. Not what happens now, or please don't hurt me, or any of the dozen fearful responses he'd expected. Just that single word, sharp and searching. Why what? Why are you helping me? Her voice had steadied somewhat, though her hands still trembled. You're his friend, his alpha. I'm nothing, I'm nobody. You're Serafina Fenris. Theron watched her flinch at the name. Daughter of Alpha King Fenris, heir to the Moonfire throne. The gold in her eyes blazed bright, then dimmed as that dark magic pressed down. He could see it now that he knew to look, the shadows wrapped around her like chains, suppressing her wolf, crushing her power into something manageable. That girl died 12 years ago. No. Theron crouched down, bringing himself to her level. She survived, and she's going to keep surviving. I give you my word. She stared at him for a long moment. Then something in her expression cracked. Not quite trust. Not yet. But the first fragile acknowledgement that trust might someday be possible. He'll kill me if he finds out you know. He won't find out. Not until I'm ready. Ready for what? Theron smiled, and there was nothing kind in it. War. He left her hidden in the library with food stolen from the kitchens and a promise to return at dawn. The walk back to his quarters felt endless, his mind churning through implications and possibilities. Kane had been his beta for 15 years. They'd fought side by side in the border wars, held the line against rogue invasions, buried friends in the same bloody soil. When Theron's father had tried to assassinate him for the throne, Kane had been the one to intercept the blade. That scar still marked his shoulder, a permanent reminder of loyalty that now felt like the cruelest kind of joke. What had been real? What had been performance? Sleep didn't come. Theron spent the hours until sunrise in his study, pulling records he'd never thought to question, examining documents he'd signed without scrutiny because his beta had prepared them. The pattern emerged slowly, terrible in its precision. Kane's influence threaded through everything, land grants that enriched his allies, military appointments that placed his loyalists in key positions, trade agreements that funneled wealth through channels only he controlled. Theron had trusted him with the administrative details of kingship, had been grateful to have a competent hand managing the tedium while he focused on the larger picture. He'd been a fool, but the trafficking records were worse. It took 3 days of careful investigation, of bribing clerks and threatening merchants and calling in favours he'd been saving for emergencies. 3 days of smiling at Kane over breakfast, of laughing at his jokes during council meetings, of pretending that everything was normal while his wolf screamed for blood. The trail led to a black market auction house that had operated near the southern border 12 years ago. Specialized in rare acquisitions, the reports said. Unusual merchandise. Children. They'd sold children. And in the ledger of sales from the week after the Moonfire massacre, the week everyone believed had claimed the entire Fenris bloodline, there was an entry. One female, approximately 14 years, unmarked but unusual colouring. Sold to CA for consideration of future services. C.A. Kane Ashford. Theron's hands shook as he traced the transaction. Serafina had been 14 when her world ended. 14 when someone dragged her from the ruins of her family and sold her like livestock. 14 when Kane... He couldn't finish the thought. The implications made him physically ill. But the ledger contained another revelation, buried in the fine print of the original acquisition report. Subject obtained via prior arrangement. Seller confirms survival guaranteed per contract terms. Prior arrangement. The massacre hadn't been chaos that Kane exploited. It had been planned, ordered. The seller had known to spare one specific girl because someone had paid them to. Theron dug deeper. The Moonfire Kingdom had been powerful once. Alpha King Fenris commanded respect across the continental territories, his bloodline ancient and his pack loyal. The attack that destroyed them had always been attributed to rogues, a coordinated assault by wolves without pack ties, motivated by nothing more than savage opportunity. But rogues didn't coordinate, they didn't plan, they didn't spare specific targets for later collection. The deeper Theron looked, the more the official story collapsed. Witness accounts that didn't match. Military reports with convenient gaps. And underneath it all, like rot beneath fresh paint, evidence of something orchestrated. Kane had been 23 when the Moonfire Kingdom fell. Already a rising star in the old Alpha's service, already building the reputation that would eventually make him indispensable. He'd been nowhere near the massacre. Official records placed him at the northern border, responding to a minor territorial dispute. But the northern border commander had died 6 months later. Hunting accident. No witnesses. And the merchant who'd handled the slave auction had drowned the following year. Tragic mishap while crossing a river. And the rogue leader who'd supposedly orchestrated the massacre had been killed by Kane himself in a dramatic confrontation that cemented his legend as a warrior. No loose ends, no living witnesses, nothing but a traumatized girl hidden away in plain sight, her power suppressed, her identity erased, her existence known only to the man who'd engineered her family's murder. Theron sat alone in his study as dawn painted the windows gold, and he understood, finally, completely, what his best friend really was. A monster. The next weeks tested every skill Theron possessed. He'd survived assassination attempts and political betrayals, navigated alliances that made his skin crawl and compromises that stained his soul. But this, pretending to trust the man who'd built his throne on children's bones, this was something different entirely. He couldn't simply expose Kane. The realization burned, but he couldn't ignore it. 15 years of embedded loyalty had given Kane roots throughout the kingdom. His allies held crucial positions in the military, the treasury, the judicial council. The nobles who owed him favors numbered in the dozens. Remove him without preparation, and half the power structure would collapse, or worse, turn hostile. And then, there was the magic. Theron had felt it that first night, the shadows wrapped around Serafina's wolf. He'd assumed it was simply a control mechanism, a way to keep her compliant. But the servants whispered stories when they thought no one was listening, strange lights in the beta's quarters, sounds that didn't match any wolf, cold spots that lingered even in summer, and Kane himself, growing stronger year by year, in ways that defied the natural limits of his bloodline. Theron found an old scholar willing to speak carefully around dangerous topics. The conversation happened in coded language, in hypotheticals and theoretical discussions, but the implications were clear. Alpha bloodlines carried power in their very essence. That power could be transferred, stolen, through certain dark rituals. A strong enough practitioner could siphon that essence gradually, feeding on it like a parasite, growing fat on stolen strength. Serafina wasn't just Cain's prisoner. She was his power source. Every day she spent under his control made him stronger and her weaker. The magic that suppressed her wolf wasn't just hiding her identity, it was draining her, slowly killing the alpha she should have become. The timeline became terrifyingly clear. Cain was building towards something. The alliances, the political positioning, the careful accumulation of power. It all pointed to a single goal. He didn't want to serve a king. He wanted to become one. And Serafina's bloodline, fully drained, would give him the strength to challenge even Theron himself. 3 weeks after that first night, Theron arranged the meeting. The Pack Library occupied the East Tower's 3rd floor, a sprawling collection of histories and treaties and philosophical texts that most wolves ignored entirely. Cain considered books a waste of time, preferred action to contemplation, and hadn't set foot in the library in years. It was the safest place in the castle. Theron arrived first, dismissing the elderly librarian with instructions that he wished to research alone. The old woman nodded and shuffled away, asking no questions. Kings were entitled to their eccentricities. Serafina came 20 minutes later, slipping through the door like a ghost. The weeks had changed her, or perhaps simply revealed what had always been hidden. She moved with more confidence now, held her head slightly higher. The gold in her eyes seemed brighter, as if distance from Cain had begun weakening whatever magic bound her. You came. Theron hadn't been entirely certain she would. You asked. She stopped several feet away, still wary. And you've been kind. Food left where I can find it. Warnings when Cain comes looking. I'm not foolish enough to ignore that. It's not kindness. It's strategy. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Is there a difference with kings? He couldn't help but admire her. 3 weeks of secret survival, hiding in plain sight while her abuser hunted, and she could still find humor in impossible situations. The Moonfire bloodline had produced warriors for generations. Serafina was proof that some things couldn't be broken, no matter how hard the world tried. I've learned things. Theron moved toward the window, watching the courtyard below where warriors trained. Cain stood among them, laughing, popular, beloved. About that night, about what really happened to your family. Serafina went very still. I know what happened. I was there. You were 14, and whatever you remember, I promise it's worse than you think. He told her everything. The trafficking records, the prior arrangement, the convenient deaths of every potential witness, the pattern of political maneuvering that pointed to a single architect. He told her that Cain hadn't just benefited from her family's destruction, he'd orchestrated it. By the end, she was shaking. Not with fear this time, but with something rawer. Something that looked like rage finally given permission to exist. He told me they died because my father was weak. Her voice came out broken. He said rogues attacked because we were vulnerable. He said I should be grateful he saved me, grateful he gave me a purpose. He's been feeding on you. Theron didn't soften the words. She deserved truth, not comfort. Your alpha bloodline. He's using dark magic to drain your power and add it to his own. That's why he's grown so strong. That's why your wolf feels so distant. Her hand moved to her shoulder to the mangled mate mark hidden beneath her dress. The bonding ceremony. He made me think it was normal. The rituals, the pain. It wasn't a bonding, it was a binding. He's been siphoning you for 4 years. Serafina closed her eyes. When she opened them, the gold blazed bright, brighter than he'd ever seen, before the shadows pressed it down again. I want him dead. The words came out flat. Certain. I want to tear his throat out and watch him choke on his own blood. So do I. Theron turned from the window to face her fully. But it's not that simple. He's embedded himself too deeply. If I move against him openly, he has allies who'll resist. He has information that could damage the kingdom. And he has you. Me. If he realizes I know, he'll kill you before I can reach you. Use you as a hostage. Or complete whatever ritual he's building toward. Theron moved closer, close enough to see the scars that peeked above her collar. I can't let that happen, I won't. Why? That question again, sharp and searching. You barely know me. I'm nothing to you. A stranger, a complication, a political liability. Why do you care whether I live or die? Theron didn't have a good answer. His wolf did. That constant howling certainty that she was his, that she mattered more than kingdoms or vengeance or anything else. But he couldn't give her that. Not yet. She'd been owned enough. Because you deserve to live. It was the truest thing he could offer. Because what was done to you was evil, and I will not let evil triumph while I have breath to stop it. Because somewhere under all that pain is an alpha queen. And she deserves the chance to rule. Serafina stared at him. Something shifted in her expression. Walls cracking, defenses weakening against their will. You can't save me. Her voice caught. No one can save me. He owns me, body and soul. The bond makes certain of that. Whatever you're planning, he'll feel it coming. He always knows. Theron did something then that surprised them both. He knelt. A king, kneeling before a broken woman in a dusty library. It shouldn't have meant anything. It should have been absurd. A gesture, a performance, empty theatre. But she stopped breathing when he did it. Stopped speaking. Stopped hiding. I'm going to destroy him. Theron looked up at her, let her see every ounce of certainty he possessed. I'm going to tear apart everything he's built and scatter the pieces to the winds. I'm going to break whatever magic binds you and set your wolf free. And I'm going to put his head on a spike where everyone can see what happens to men who hurt what's mine. The last word slipped out without permission. Mine. His wolf surged with satisfaction even as his human mind scrambled to explain it away. But I need you to trust me. He held out his hand, palm up, offering. Not demanding. Can you do that? Serafina looked at his hand for a long moment. Her eyes flickered, gold to grey to gold again, a war between hope and experience, between what she wanted and what life had taught her to expect. I don't remember how to trust anyone. The confession came out barely louder than breathing. He took that from me. He took everything from me. Then let me remind you. Theron's hand didn't waver. One day at a time. One choice at a time. Let me show you what trust looks like when it's earned instead of forced. Outside the window, a crow landed on the sill. Its eyes flashed with dark magic, a deep swirling black that no natural bird possessed. It tilted its head, studying them through the glass with an intelligence that made Theron's wolf snarl. He didn't let his expression change. Didn't acknowledge the creature. But inside, something cold settled in his chest. They were being watched. Somewhere across the compound, in the training yard where warriors laughed and sparred and never suspected the monster in their midst, Cain Ashford looked up from the fight. His eyes found the library tower, his lips curved into a smile. And in the library, Serafina's trembling fingers finally touched Theron's palm. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 3. Serafina didn't trust Theron. How could she? Trust was a luxury she'd abandoned 12 years ago. Left behind in the ashes of her childhood, alongside innocence and hope, and the belief that the world contained anything but cruelty. Cain had taught her what trust earned you, pain, betrayal, the slow dismantling of everything you held dear. But survival had its own logic. 12 years of staying alive in a monster's house had honed her instincts to a razor's edge, and those instincts recognized opportunity when it knelt before her, in a dusty library. Theron wanted to destroy Cain. She wanted Cain destroyed. The mathematics of alliance didn't require trust, only aligned interests and careful calculation. So she began feeding him information. Small things at first. Testing. Cain rises at dawn and runs the northern perimeter. Cain meets with a hooded figure every third Tuesday. Cain keeps a locked box in his study that he checks obsessively, muttering words she can never quite hear. Theron absorbed each detail without judgment, without pushing for more than she could give. He asked questions, careful, specific questions, but never demanded, never threatened, never made her feel like the information was owed rather than offered. It was disorienting. Kindness as a weapon she didn't know how to defend against. "There's a room," she told him during their fourth meeting, voice barely above a whisper, even in the library's dusty safety. "In the basement. I've never been allowed inside, but I hear things sometimes. Chanting and screaming that doesn't sound human." Theron's jaw tightened. "Can you describe where exactly?" "Behind the wine cellar. There's a false wall. I found it by accident once. When I was looking for somewhere to hide, Cain caught me near it and—" She touched her ribs unconsciously. Some scars never stopped aching. "I never went back." "You won't have to." His voice carried that certainty she was beginning to recognize, the absolute conviction of a king who expected the world to bend to his will. "When this is over, you'll never have to hide again." She should have laughed at such naive promises. Instead, something flickered in her chest, warm and startling and terrifying in its unfamiliarity. Her wolf stirred. It had started as whispers. For 12 years, her wolf had been silent. Not dead, she would have felt that, would have experienced the hollow agony that came when a wolf departed completely, but dormant, buried so deep beneath Cain's dark magic that she'd almost forgotten the creature existed. The first whisper came during her second meeting with Theron, a flutter of warmth in her chest when he moved closer, a sensation almost like recognition. She'd dismissed it. Exhaustion. Hope playing tricks on a starving mind. But the whispers grew louder. By the third week, she felt her wolf like a presence just beneath her skin, pacing, restless, straining against chains she could now sense. When Theron entered a room, warmth bloomed in her chest. When his hand accidentally brushed hers during an intelligence exchange, electricity sparked through her veins. And when Cain touched her, the growl shocked them both. It rumbled up from somewhere primal, somewhere Seraphina had forgotten existed. Cain's hand on her shoulder, casual possession, and her wolf surged with such violent fury that the sound escaped before she could swallow it. Cain's eyes narrowed. His grip tightened. What was that? Nothing. She forced her voice to remain steady. A cough. I think I'm catching cold. He watched her for a long moment, that calculating stare she'd learned to fear, before releasing her with a dismissive shove. You're useless enough without being sick. Stay away from the other servants until it passes. Alone in her room that night, Seraphina pressed both hands to her chest and felt her wolf clawing at the inside of her ribs. The sensation was overwhelming after so many years of silence. Like blood returning to a limb that had been numb for a decade, painful, tingling, almost too much to bear. Mate, her wolf howled. Mate, mate, mate. Seraphina squeezed her eyes shut. No. Impossible. She was marked, scarred and mutilated as that mark was. She belonged to Cain in every way their laws recognized. A true mate bond couldn't form when another bond already existed. But her wolf didn't care about laws. Didn't care about marks or magic or the careful logic of survival. Her wolf only knew one truth, and it howled that truth with the desperation of a creature too long caged. Mate. Theron wasn't sleeping. His wolf wouldn't let him. 3 weeks of secret meetings, of stolen moments in dusty corners, of watching Seraphina slowly unfold from a cowering victim into something sharper, and his beast had lost all interest in rest. He found himself outside her window at night, just standing there in the shadows, watching the light in her room, counting the minutes until dawn when he might find some excuse to see her again. The behaviour should have alarmed him. A king didn't moon over unavailable women like a lovesick adolescent. But his wolf didn't care about propriety. His wolf only knew one thing. She's ours. She's always been ours. We've been waiting for her our whole lives. The pull between them had become almost physical, a thread of connection that tightened every time they met, that hummed with recognition when their eyes caught across crowded rooms, that made his hands itch with the need to touch her, to hold her, to rip Cain's ruined mark from her shoulder and replace it with his own. He was going mad. That was the only explanation. This can't be happening. Serafina's voice shook during their 5th meeting. They stood closer than necessary, drawn together by a gravity neither could resist. I'm his. You were never his. The words tore from Theron's throat, raw and certain. He stole you, caged you. That mark on your shoulder isn't a mating bond. It's a brand. A claim of ownership, not a soul connection. My wolf knows the difference. He stepped closer. She didn't retreat. I know the difference, he finished softly. Serafina stared at him with those golden eyes, brighter now than they'd been weeks ago, the magic suppressing her wolf beginning to crack under pressure it was never meant to withstand. Even if that's true, it doesn't change anything. The law. The law serves justice. What was done to you wasn't justice. It was theft and torture and something I don't have words dark enough to describe. Theron's hands clenched at his sides, fighting the urge to reach for her. When this is over, when Cain is dead and his magic broken, I'm going to petition the Council of Alphas to dissolve that mark entirely. It was never valid. It was coerced, performed on a child, sealed with dark magic instead of genuine bond. No legitimate court would uphold it. Hope flickered in her expression before fear crushed it back down. And if they refuse? Then I'll dissolve the council and build a new one. He said it simply, as if rewriting the political structure of their entire civilization was a minor inconvenience. Whatever it takes, Serafina, however long it takes, you will be free. She believed him. That was the terrifying part. Against every survival instinct she'd honed over 12 brutal years. She looked at this man, this king with his impossible promises, and she believed him. Her wolf howled with joy. Serafina turned away before he could see her cry. The nausea started a week later. At first, she blamed stress, secret meetings and forbidden feelings and the constant terror of discovery. Her body had plenty of reasons to rebel. She forced down dry bread and ignored the churning in her stomach and told herself it would pass. It didn't pass. By the 3rd morning of retching into a chamber pot, Serafina knew. She'd been raised in a pack, surrounded by mated pairs and their endless children. She recognized the signs. She was pregnant. The timing made calculation impossible. Had it been Cain's cruelty 2 weeks ago, that night he'd come to her room drunk and vicious? Or the dark ritual he'd forced her into last month, the one that left her bleeding and barely conscious? Or, her mind shied away from the thought, but her wolf embraced it with fierce certainty. Could it be something else entirely? She and Theron had never touched more than hands. But mate bonds didn't follow normal rules. True mates could conceive through spiritual connection alone, through the joining of wolves that transcended physical limitations. The old stories spoke of such things. Children born of souls bound together regardless of circumstance. Serafina pressed her palm flat against her still flat stomach and felt the faintest flutter, too early to be movement, probably imagination. But her wolf purred with recognition nonetheless. Ours, her beast whispered. Ours and his. She didn't tell Theron. She didn't tell Cain. She told no one, because a child changed everything. If it was Cain's, if the dark magic that poisoned their false bond had somehow produced life, it would be used against her. A tool for control, an heir to whatever twisted legacy Cain was building. And if it was Theron's, If it was somehow, impossibly miraculously Theron's, born of a bond forming despite every law of their kind, it could start a war. The legitimate Alpha King's child, growing in another man's claimed mate. The scandal would shatter alliances, divide loyalties, give Cain exactly the ammunition he needed to move against Theron openly. She couldn't risk it. Not yet. Not until she knew more. So she swallowed her nausea and hid her secret and prayed to gods she'd stopped believing in that she'd survive long enough to learn the truth. Cain found out anyway. Serafina never knew how. Perhaps he'd noticed her avoiding certain foods. Perhaps a servant had seen her vomiting and reported it. Perhaps the dark magic that bound them carried information along its twisted threads. The night he confronted her, his eyes blazed with something she'd never seen before. Joy. Genuine, terrifying joy. "You're carrying my heir." He said it like a prayer, like a revelation. Finally. After all these years. Finally. She hadn't confirmed anything, hadn't admitted anything, but denial seemed pointless when he looked at her with such certainty. "I wasn't sure," she whispered. "It's early." "I'm sure." He gripped her shoulders. Too tight, always too tight. But for once the violence was wrapped in something almost tender. "I've been waiting for this, working toward this. Do you have any idea what this means?" She shook her head, mute with fear. "You will?" He released her, practically vibrating with energy she didn't understand. "You will." The formal dinner announcement came 3 days later. The great hall blazed with candlelight and false cheer. Every noble family in the kingdom had been summoned for what Cain had described only as wonderful news. They packed the long tables now, drinking Theron's wine and eating Theron's food, utterly unaware of the monster who'd orchestrated it all. Serafina sat at the high table beside her husband. The gown he'd chosen for her was beautiful, deep green velvet that matched the false kindness in his eyes. But it felt like a shroud, like burial clothes for a woman being lowered alive into her grave. Theron sat at the table's head, crown gleaming, expression perfectly neutral. But his eyes followed her constantly. A king's gaze impossible to read, and underneath it, something that made her wolf strain against its chains. Cain stood. The hall fell silent with the immediate deference that powerful men commanded. He smiled, that bright, charming smile she'd learned to fear more than his anger, and raised his goblet. "Friends, family, honoured guests." His voice carried effortlessly through the space. "Thank you for joining us tonight. I know the summons was unexpected, but some news cannot wait for ordinary occasions." He reached down and drew Serafina to her feet. His hand settled on her stomach, possessive, proprietary, making his claim visible for every witness in the room. "My mate and I are expecting our first child," applause erupted. Cheers and congratulations, and the particular buzz of nobles calculating how this development affected their own positions. Serafina forced her lips into a smile that felt like broken glass. Cain basked in the attention, hand never leaving her stomach, every inch the proud husband and soon-to-be father. This child represents the future of our pack, a continuation of everything we've built together, the Beta bloodline, strengthened and secured for generations to come. Beta bloodline. The words hit Serafina like a physical blow. He truly believed it, truly assumed the child was his, a Beta's offspring, inheriting his carefully stolen power. But her wolf knew different. Her wolf felt the life growing inside her, felt its essence, felt the truth that Cain's arrogance made him blind to. This child was no Beta's get. This child was Alpha-born. Her eyes found Theron across the high table. In them she saw a reflection of her own turmoil, recognition, fury, and something deeper, something that looked like anguish. She tried to convey everything she couldn't say aloud, apology for the scene he was being forced to witness, fear for what Cain would do next, and underneath it all, desperate and undeniable. "Help me." Theron's knuckles went white around his goblet, the silver dented under the pressure of his grip. That night, Cain beat her for the way she'd looked at the Alpha King. "You think I didn't notice?" His fist connected with her ribs, driving the air from her lungs. "The way you watched him. The way he watched you?" Serafina curled around her stomach, protecting the life inside even as the rest of her absorbed the punishment. I didn't. "Don't lie to me." Another blow, this one to her shoulder, the scarred one, the marked one, pain radiating through ruined tissue. "I've seen the way you light up when he enters a room. I've felt your wolf stirring. Did you think I wouldn't notice?" She couldn't answer, could barely breathe. Cain crouched beside her, gripping her chin and forcing her face up to meet his eyes. "That child is mine. You are mine. Whatever pathetic fantasy you've been nursing about your precious king, it ends now. If I catch you looking at him again, I'll cut the pup from your belly myself. Understand?" She nodded, tears streaming, voice gone. He dropped her chin and stood, adjusting his disheveled clothing with casual contempt. "Clean yourself up. You're embarrassing to look at." The door slammed behind him. Serafina lay on the cold floor, arms wrapped around her stomach, and felt her wolf howling with rage she couldn't express. The child inside her flickered, alive, fighting, determined to survive despite everything. "Hold on," she told it silently. "Just hold on. He's coming. He'll save us." She had no evidence for such faith. No reason to believe that a king she'd known for weeks would risk everything for a broken woman carrying an uncertain child. But her wolf believed, and for the first time in 12 years, Serafina let herself believe too. The letter appeared under Theron's door at midnight. He'd been pacing his chambers, sleep impossible after the dinner's revelations, his wolf clawing at his control with demands for blood and vengeance, and the woman being hurt somewhere he couldn't reach her. The soft whisper of paper against stone drew him up short. An envelope, unmarked. No seal, no signature, no identifying characteristics. Inside was a photograph. Old, faded. The colours washed out by time, but the image was clear enough. A child of perhaps 3 years stood in a sunlit garden, her golden hair catching the light. Beside her knelt a man, tall, powerful, with the bearing of one born to rule. His eyes were the same gold as the child's. Their stubborn chins matched perfectly. Alpha King Fenris, the murdered ruler whose death had created the vacuum Theron eventually filled. And his daughter, his heir, the princess everyone believed had died with him, Serafina. Theron's hands trembled as he turned the photograph over. Written on the back in careful, anonymous script, "She is the true heir. Cain knows." He's planning to take everything. Below the words, a symbol. Theron's blood ran cold when he recognized it, the mark of the Shadow Court. For 5 years, the Shadow Court had been a thorn in his side, an underground resistance that opposed his rule, questioned his legitimacy, sabotaged his initiatives through careful whisper campaigns. He'd assumed they were loyalists to the old regime, wolves who resented a newcomer on the throne. But this, if the Shadow Court knew about Serafina, if they'd known all along and had been waiting, watching, preparing, then everything he thought he understood about the political landscape was wrong. Were they enemies? They'd fought him for years, but they'd also just handed him the key to destroying Cain. Were they allies? They clearly wanted Cain exposed, but they might also want Theron gone, replaced by what they considered the legitimate Fenris heir. Theron stared at the photograph, at Serafina's childhood face smiling up at her father, at the man whose death had paved the way for everything that came after. Enemies and allies were no longer clear. Nothing was clear anymore. Except one thing. Somewhere in this castle, a woman carrying a child that might be his was suffering at the hands of a monster. And whatever came next, whatever tangled web of politics and secrets and ancient claims, that woman needed to survive. Everything else could wait. Theron reached for his cloak and slipped into the darkness. Tonight, the king went hunting. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 4. Everything accelerated. The Shadow Court met Theron in the ruins of an old temple 3 miles beyond the palace walls, a place where the ancient wolves had worshipped before politics and power corrupted their faith. 5 figures waited in the moonlight, faces hidden beneath deep hoods, but their scents carried no deception. Only grief, only determination, only the particular weariness of people who had been fighting too long. We've been searching for her for 12 years. The speaker was a woman, her voice carrying the rasp of age and sorrow. The princess, the heir. We knew she survived, our seers confirmed it, but Cain's magic hid her too well. You could have come to me sooner. Theron's voice came out harder than he intended. I've been king for 5 years. If you knew about Cain, we didn't trust you. Another figure stepped forward, male, younger. Your mother helped cover up the massacre. For all we knew, you were part of it. The words landed like a blow. Theron's jaw tightened. My mother has been dead for 7 years. Dead, yes. But her sins didn't die with her. The young man produced a leather folder, worn soft with handling. We've spent a decade gathering evidence. Would you like to see what your family helped build? Theron took the folder. His hands didn't shake. He wouldn't let them. Inside were documents, letters in his mother's handwriting. Financial records showing payments to mercenary companies. Witness statements from survivors who'd hidden in the shadows while the Moonfire Kingdom burned. His mother hadn't just known about the massacre. She'd helped plan it. The Fenris Pack controlled the northern trade routes, the old woman explained, her voice clinical despite the horror of her words. Your mother wanted those routes for herself. Cain wanted the Fenris bloodline for his rituals. They made a deal. She provided political cover. He provided the violence. After the massacre, she helped spread the story about rogue attacks while Cain collected his prize. Seraphina, a 14-year-old girl, sold into slavery while his mother counted her profits. There's more. The young man's voice held no satisfaction, only grim necessity. We know what Cain is planning with the child. Theron looked up from the damning papers. Tell me. The pregnancy isn't about creating an heir. It's about creating a vessel. The old woman moved closer, her hood falling back to reveal silver hair and eyes that had seen too much death. Seraphina's alpha power has been suppressed for 12 years, but it hasn't diminished. It's been building. Cain's ritual is designed to transfer all of that accumulated power into the child upon birth. Power he can then claim by blood, right as the father. He'd become an alpha, a true alpha, with the strength of the Fenris bloodline running through a vessel he controls completely. The woman's expression hardened. Strong enough to challenge you, strong enough to win. He's been planning this coup since before you ever took the crown, Your Majesty. You were always just a placeholder, a puppet king, keeping the throne warm until he was ready to claim it. The folder fell from Theron's numb fingers. 12 years. Cain had been working toward this moment for 12 years, since before Theron had even dreamed of ruling, since before his father's assassination attempt had thrust him into power. Every battle they'd fought together, every confidence they'd shared, every moment of what Theron had believed was genuine friendship, all of it had been manipulation, performance, a patient spider spinning webs around a fly too stupid to notice. How long until the birth? 3 weeks, perhaps less. The dark magic accelerates certain processes. 3 weeks. He had 3 weeks to dismantle a conspiracy that had been building since before he ever took the crown. Then we need to move quickly. The evidence mounted over the following days. each piece worse than the last. His mother's involvement ran deeper than political convenience. Letters revealed she'd specifically requested that Fenris's daughter be spared, not out of mercy, but because she'd known about the bloodline's value and had wanted to ensure Cain's ritual could proceed. She'd helped select the trafficking ring. She'd approved the auction details. Her own son's future beta had bought a child slave with her blessing. Other documents showed how Cain had manipulated Theron's rise to power. The assassination attempt by his father, the one that had seemed to come from nowhere, that had cemented Theron's claim to the throne when he survived, had been orchestrated. Cain had fed his father false information about Theron's supposed treachery, had engineered the confrontation, had positioned himself to intercept the killing blow and earn eternal gratitude. The scar on Cain's shoulder wasn't a badge of loyalty. It was a brand of ownership. "I made you," it said. "Everything you are belongs to me." Theron found the old prophecies next, texts Cain had hidden in that basement room Seraphina had described, writings about alpha bloodlines and power transfer, about vessels and rituals and the specific conditions required to steal another wolf's essence. The ritual required the mother to die in childbirth. Seraphina wasn't just a power source, she was a sacrifice. Cain had never intended for her to survive the birth of her child. The spiral took Theron on the 7th night. He'd been holding himself together through sheer will, continuing to play the ignorant king, smiling at Cain across council tables, pretending that nothing had changed while the Shadow Court gathered forces in the background. But 7 nights of accumulated horror finally broke through his defenses. He found himself on the morning cliffs without remembering how he got there. The bottle in his hand was already half empty. Below, the ocean crashed against rocks that had claimed dozens of grieving wolves over the centuries. Those who found the weight of loss too heavy to carry, who chose the quick mercy of the fall over the slow torture of endurance. His mother had helped murder children to expand her trade routes. His rise to power had been engineered by a monster. His beta, his brother in all but blood, had been torturing a woman for 12 years, planning to steal her power and murder her in childbirth, and Theron had never noticed, never suspected, never questioned the quiet wife who flinched at loud noises and moved like a ghost through her own home. What kind of king missed such evil in his own court? What kind of man called a monster friend? The bottle found his lips again. The liquor burned going down, but it couldn't touch the cold spreading through his chest. Maybe Cain deserved to win. Maybe a throne built on such rotten foundations deserved to fall. Maybe the kindest thing Theron could do was walk away, burn it all down, let the conspiracy complete itself, stop pretending he had any right to rule a kingdom that had been handed to him by murderers. The cliff edge beckoned. The rocks below looked almost peaceful in the moonlight. "You're the king." Her voice came from behind him, quiet but steady. He didn't turn. Couldn't face her. Not when he knew what his family had helped do to hers. "Seraphina, you shouldn't be here. If Cain finds you gone. He's unconscious. Too much wine at dinner." She moved closer, her footsteps careful on the rocky ground. "I heard you leave the palace. Felt you through the bond." The bond. It had been growing stronger daily, that thread of connection between them that defied every law of their kind. He'd been trying to ignore it. She belonged to another, carried another's child, and whatever his wolf claimed, he had no right to her. But tonight, drunk and broken on the edge of oblivion, he couldn't pretend anymore. "I know what my mother did." The words scraped his throat like broken glass. "I know how she helped, how she planned, how she—" He couldn't finish. "Your family died so mine could profit. Your childhood was stolen so my beta could build his power. Everything I am, everything I've built, all of it stands on your family's graves." Seraphina sat beside him on the cold stone, not touching but close enough that he could feel her warmth against the night's chill. "Yes," she said simply. No softening, no comfort, just truth, delivered with the matter-of-fact clarity of someone who had learned long ago that pretty lies only prolonged suffering. "You didn't know," she continued. And now you do. The question is, what you'll do with it. What can I do? The laugh that escaped him held no humour. Expose Cain and watch my kingdom tear itself apart? Challenge him and lose because he's been building strength for a decade while I played at being king? Walk away and let him have what he's schemed for? You could die. Her voice didn't waver. That cliff looks very accommodating. Probably quick, if you aim for the rocks instead of the water. He turned to stare at her. She met his gaze steadily, gold eyes bright in the moonlight. Is that what you want me to do? No. Something flickered in her expression, pain quickly suppressed. But I've learned not to expect anything from anyone. If you want to die, I can't stop you. I'm not strong enough yet. Yet? My wolf is waking. She raised one hand and for a moment, just a moment, claws flickered at her fingertips before the dark magic forced them back. Whatever bond is growing between us, it's breaking the chains he put on me. Every day I'm stronger. Every day the magic holds a little less. Hope. It threaded through her voice despite everything, despite 12 years of torture, despite the child growing in her belly, despite the man who had destroyed her family and planned to kill her in 3 weeks. She still had hope. The Shadow Court says the ritual requires you to die. Theron forced the words out. The power transfer. It needs your death to complete. Seraphina nodded. I know. I've always known, I think. Just didn't let myself believe it. She looked out at the ocean, moonlight silver on the waves. He's been preparing me for years, making sure I'm broken enough to be compliant, but alive enough to be useful. The pregnancy was the final piece. I won't let him kill you. You might not have a choice. She turned back to him, and her eyes held something he couldn't quite identify. Not acceptance, not surrender, but a kind of fierce peace. But that's not the point, is it? You're sitting on these cliffs getting drunk because you found out your mother was a monster, because your best friend is a killer, because everything you believed about yourself was a lie. Wasn't it? Was it? She tilted her head, studying him. Your mother's sins are not yours. Cain's manipulations don't change who you've been as king. The throne might have been handed to you by murderers, but what you've done with it, the wars you've ended, the justice you've built, the people you've protected, that was you. Not your mother. Not Cain. You. I protected no one. His voice cracked. You were suffering in my own palace. And now you know. And now you're trying to help. She reached out, her fingers brushing his wrist. The touch sent electricity through his veins. That's the only thing that matters. Not what came before. What comes next? Theron stared at her. This woman who should hate him, who had every right to blame him for his family's crimes, who was carrying a child that might be used to steal her very soul. Why don't you hate me? I spent 12 years hating. Her smile was sad and ancient. It didn't help. Didn't change anything. Didn't make me stronger or safer, or more likely to survive. She squeezed his wrist gently. I've decided to try something different. I've decided to hope. It's terrifying and probably foolish. But it's the only thing Cain never managed to take from me completely. The bottle slipped from Theron's fingers. He heard it shatter on the rocks below, but the sound seemed very far away. I don't deserve your hope. Maybe not. But you have it anyway. She rose, offering him her hand. Now get up. We have a conspiracy to destroy and a kingdom to save. You can wallow in guilt after Cain is dead. He took her hand. They never made it back to the palace. The soldiers emerged from the tree line just as dawn began painting the sky gold. 20 wolves in battle formation, surrounding them before either could react. Cain's personal guard. Elite warriors who had sworn loyalty to the Beta Commander before Theron ever took the throne. Cain himself walked through their ranks, his smile bright and terrible in the growing light. I wondered when you'd finally figure it out. He stopped 10 feet away, close enough for conversation but far enough to react if Theron lunged. My spies reported your contact with the Shadow Court 3 days ago. I must say, I expected you to break sooner. You're more resilient than your mother gave you credit for. Kane, don't. The smile didn't waver. Don't beg. Don't negotiate. Don't pretend we can go back to what we were. You know everything now, which means this particular game is over. Time for a new one. He gestured, and the soldiers moved closer. Theron shifted his weight, preparing to fight. 20 against 1 were terrible odds, but he wouldn't go quietly. Not while Serafina stood behind him, not while any chance remained to protect her. Take the king alive, Kane ordered. We need him functional for the public execution. But the bitch! His eyes found Serafina, and something dark and hungry entered his expression. She's been disobedient. Remind her what that costs. The soldiers lunged. Theron met them with claws and fury, tearing through the first wave with the desperate strength of a wolf fighting for its mate. Blood sprayed, bodies fell, but there were too many, and they'd been prepared. Silver chains appeared in their hands, burning his flesh as they wrapped around his limbs, dragging him down through sheer numbers. Behind him, Serafina screamed. The sound cut through the chaos like a blade. Not fear, rage. Pure volcanic rage that had been building for 12 years, held back by magic and terror and the slow grinding of hope into dust. The soldiers closing on her hesitated. And then she changed. The shift tore through her with violent beauty, bones cracking, muscles reforming, dark magic shattering under the force of a wolf that had been caged too long. Serafina's scream became a howl that shook the very air. Where a broken woman had stood, a wolf emerged. She was massive, white as fresh snow with eyes of pure alpha gold that blazed like twin suns. Power radiated from her in waves, raw, untamed, 12 years of suppressed strength finally given form. The soldiers nearest her stumbled backward, their wolves whimpering submission at the presence of something far above their station. Serafina's wolf lunged. She moved like lightning, like vengeance given physical form. 3 soldiers went down before they could react, throats torn, bodies crumpling. A 4th tried to run and died with her teeth in his spine. The formation shattered as wolves who had expected easy prey found themselves facing something ancient and terrible. Kane's face went pale. For the first time since Theron had known him, genuine fear flickered in those calculating eyes. Contain her, his voice cracked. The binding chains. Use the binding chains. More soldiers produced silver chains etched with dark runes. They circled the white wolf carefully, waiting for an opening. Serafina snarled, spinning to face each threat, but she was weak, untrained. Her wolf had been dormant for so long, and this sudden awakening was already costing her. Theron saw the moment her strength began to fail. The golden light in her eyes flickered. Her massive form wavered. Serafina. The chains struck. Dark magic flared as they wrapped around the white wolf, dragging her down. She fought. Gods, how she fought. But the ritual bindings were too strong, and 30 seconds of freedom weren't enough to overcome 12 years of captivity. The wolf collapsed, shrank, became human again. Serafina lay naked on the bloodied grass, gasping, trembling, but alive. Her eyes found Theron's across the chaos, still gold, still blazing with defiant fire. I'm not broken, that gaze said. I've never been broken. I've been waiting. Kane's soldiers dragged Theron to his feet, chains burning his wrists, his ankles, his throat. Around him, the survivors of Serafina's brief rampage gathered their wounded and their dead, their expressions caught between fear and fury. Interesting. Kane approached Serafina slowly, careful despite her restraints. I didn't expect that. The mate bond must be accelerating her recovery. Your fault, Your Majesty. If you'd left her alone, she'd have remained perfectly docile until the birth. He crouched beside her, gripping her hair and forcing her head back. Now I'll have to break her all over again. Tedious, but not impossible. His smile returned, sharp and cruel. The ritual can wait a few more weeks. First, I think we need to teach both of you some lessons about defiance. The dungeon beneath the palace had been built centuries ago, in an era when kings ruled through fear rather than law. The cells were carved from living rock, cold and dark, and designed to crush the spirit as thoroughly as they confined the body. Theron hung from chains in the deepest cell, silver burning his wrists, his power suppressed by runes etched into the stone walls. 3 days since his capture, 3 days of darkness and pain, and the slow, grinding knowledge that everything he'd tried to prevent was coming to pass. The door opened. Light spilled in, harsh after so long in blackness. Kane descended the stairs with the casual confidence of a man who had already won. He'd dressed for the occasion, fine clothes, polished boots, the kind of careful presentation usually reserved for formal occasions. She was supposed to be mine forever. He stopped a few feet from Theron, his smile carrying the satisfaction of a predator toying with trapped prey. A pet. A power source. Something beautiful and broken that existed only to serve my needs. You're insane. Insane? Kane laughed. I've been planning this for 15 years. I orchestrated the fall of a kingdom. I manipulated 2 generations of royalty. I've accumulated more power through patience and cunning than any wolf has achieved through brute force in centuries. That's not insanity, that's vision. He began to pace, circling Theron like a wolf examining wounded prey. But you had to interfere. You had to notice her, to care about her, to wake something in her that was supposed to stay dormant. Her wolf breaking free, even for 30 seconds, destabilizes the entire ritual. I need her completely suppressed when the child is born. I need her spirit crushed beyond any possibility of resistance. You'll never break her. Kane stopped pacing. Something shifted in his expression, amusement fading into cold calculation. No? Then perhaps I'll break you in front of her. Let her watch her precious true mate die slowly, screaming, begging for mercy that never comes. He leaned close, his breath warm against Theron's ear. That should shatter whatever's left of her defiance. And the best part? She'll hear every moment through that bond you've so thoughtfully created between you. The words hit Theron like a physical blow. The mind link. It had been growing stronger for weeks, that thread of connection between his wolf and hers. If it was fully open now, if she could hear his thoughts, feel his pain. Seraphina. He sent the thought desperately, reaching through the bond with everything he had. Silence. For one terrible moment, only silence. Then, I'm here. Her voice in his mind was weak, strained but present. She was alive, she was aware, and she was listening. He's going to torture you, she sent. I can hear him planning it. Theron, don't worry about me. He poured every ounce of certainty he possessed into the thought. Focus on surviving. Focus on the child. Whatever happens to me doesn't matter. It matters to me. 3 simple words, and they carried weight that stole his breath. Seraphina. I'm coming. Her mental voice strengthened, that golden fire he'd seen in her eyes, now burning through their bond. My wolf is awake now. Truly awake. The chains slow her, but they can't stop her. Not anymore. I've been pretending to be broken, letting them think I'm subdued, but I'm not. Hope flared in his chest despite everything. How long? Hours. Maybe less. A pause, and when she continued, her voice held something fierce and ancient and absolutely unbreakable. Don't you dare die before I get there, Theron Valdris. I've spent 12 years waiting to be saved. Now it's my turn to do the saving. And I will not lose you before I've had the chance. Kane was still speaking, outlining plans for torture and public execution, but Theron barely heard him. His entire being had focused on that golden thread connecting him to Seraphina, to his mate, his queen, the wolf who had survived everything the world had thrown at her and emerged not broken, but forged. I'll hold on, he promised her, however long it takes. Good. And even through the mind link he could hear her smile. Because this time, the monster isn't going to win. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 5. Serafina had spent 12 years being a victim. 12 years of silence, of submission, of making herself small enough to survive another day. 12 years of swallowing screams and burying rage, and telling herself that endurance was the same as victory. She had become an expert in the art of disappearing, fading into shadows, speaking only when spoken to, existing as a ghost in her own life. No more. The chains they'd wrapped around her burned with dark magic, but the burning felt different now. Distant. Like pain happening to someone else while she watched from far away. Her wolf prowled beneath her skin, patient and powerful and absolutely certain of what came next. Hours, she'd told Theron. Maybe less. She'd been lying. It wouldn't take hours. The guard outside her door was one of Kane's most trusted, a brutal wolf named Marcus, who had helped drag her back from the cliffs, who had watched with empty eyes while she was chained and beaten. He stood now with his back to her cell, confident in the magic that bound her, certain that the broken woman inside posed no threat. His certainty was a gift. Serafina closed her eyes and reached deep, past the chains, past the burning, past 12 years of suppression and fear. Her wolf rose to meet her, and this time there was no hesitation. No struggle. Just two halves of the same soul finally moving in perfect synchronization. The shift came like breathing. One moment she was human, small and chained and bleeding. The next she was wolf, massive, white, burning with golden light that made the dark magic shriek and shatter. The chains fell away like paper. The cell bars bent under the force of her emergence. Marcus barely had time to turn before her jaws closed around his throat. The Shadow Court breached the palace at midnight, exactly as planned. They came through the old servant passages, tunnels that hadn't been used in decades, that Serafina had mapped during years of hiding from Kane's rages. 30 wolves in dark clothing, moving with the silent precision of people who had spent 12 years preparing for this moment. Their leader was the old woman from the temple meeting, whose name Serafina had finally learned. Ilara, once her mother's handmaid, now commander of the resistance that had never stopped believing their princess would return. Your Highness. Ilara's voice cracked when she saw Serafina waiting in the shadows, human again but crackling with barely contained power. We've been... Later. Serafina's voice came out strange to her own ears, commanding certain nothing like the whisper she'd trained herself to use. The king is in the deep dungeons. Kane has guards at every entrance, but there's a path through the old mine shafts that connects to the lowest level. I can guide you. The mine shafts collapsed years ago. They want people to think that. Serafina smiled, and there was nothing soft in it. Kane used them for his rituals. I followed him once when he thought I was too broken to be curious. The resistance moved through the palace like ghosts, guided by a woman who had spent 12 years learning every shadow. Serafina knew which floorboards creaked, which corners held guards, which routes Kane's patrols avoided because they were too dangerous, or too far, or simply beneath notice. She knew because surviving Kane had required knowing everything. Every escape route, every hiding place, every weakness in the fortress he'd built around her, now that knowledge became a weapon. The mineshaft entrance was hidden behind a false wall in the wine cellar, exactly where she'd told Theron weeks ago, exactly where Kane's most dangerous work had always been done. The passage beyond was narrow and dark, lit only by phosphorescent fungi that gave everything an eerie blue glow. There are wards ahead, Serafina warned as they descended. Dark magic. They'll try to suppress your wolves, make you feel weak and afraid. Push through. They're designed for beta wolves. They won't hold against true alpha will. And you, Highness? Ilara's voice was careful. Can you push through? Serafina didn't answer with words. She simply let her power rise, let the golden light of her wolf shine through her human skin until the passage glowed with warmth that made the dark wards shriek and recoil. No one asked again. They emerged in the lowest level of the dungeons, where prisoners were kept, not for justice but for suffering. The cells here were carved from living rock, etched with runes that drained hope as efficiently as they drained strength. Theron's cell was at the far end. Serafina felt him through the bond, his pain, his determination, his desperate relief when he sensed her approach. "I'm here," she sent. "Hold on." "Sarah," I said, "hold on." The guards at his cell died quickly, efficiently, without the satisfaction of understanding who had killed them. Serafina's claws opened their throats while the resistance secured the corridor, and then she was at the bars, her hands finding the locks that bound them. The keys! She didn't need keys. Her wolf surged forward, golden power flooding into the metal until the lock mechanism screamed and shattered. The bars swung open, and there he was, bloodied, burned, chained but alive. Their eyes met. Something passed between them that didn't need words: recognition, relief, and something deeper that neither of them had time to name. "Can you walk?" Serafina was already working on his chains, her claws making quick work of the dark metal. "I'll crawl if I have to." "You won't have to." The last chain fell away, and she caught him as he stumbled, her strength surprising them both. "Lean on me." He did, and together they began the long climb back toward the surface. Cain was waiting, not in the throne room, not in his quarters, but in the ritual chamber, a vast underground space carved from black stone, covered in runes that pulsed with hungry crimson light. He'd accelerated his timeline when his guards reported the breach, and now he stood at the center of a circle of power, dark magic swirling around him like a storm. "I knew you'd come here eventually." His voice echoed off the stone walls, calm despite the chaos erupting throughout his carefully built kingdom. "The ritual calls to you, doesn't it? All that power trapped for so long. It wants to be released." Serafina stepped into the chamber alone. She'd left Theron with the resistance, his injuries too severe for him to fight, his presence a liability in what was about to happen. "Don't," he'd begged through the bond. "Don't face him alone." "I have to." She'd touched his face, let him feel her certainty through their connection. "This has to be me. This has always been me." Now she stood before the monster who had stolen her childhood, and she felt nothing but cold, clarifying rage. "The child," Cain said, gesturing at her barely showing stomach. "It was supposed to be perfect, a vessel for all your accumulated power, born through sacrifice, claimed through blood, right. 12 years of patience, and it would have finally been mine." "The child isn't yours." The words surprised him. She saw it in the flicker of his expression, the momentary crack in his composure. "Don't be stupid. I'm the only one who's ever... The dark magic you used to suppress my wolf also prevented any pregnancy from your violations." Serafina's voice stayed steady, even as the truth she'd discovered only days ago burned in her chest. "Every time you forced yourself on me, every night you claimed ownership of my body, none of it took. The magic made certain of that." "Then how?" "My wolf." She smiled, and it was not a kind smile. During one of the nights when she broke through just enough, just for a moment, she reached for her true mate. A dream shared between wolves while their human minds slept. This child was conceived in a moment of pure bond connection, the way our kind were meant to create life. Understanding dawned in Cain's eyes, then fury. "Theron's. The child is Theron's. The child is mine." Serafina's wolf surged forward, gold light spilling from her eyes. "And it is heir to both bloodlines, Fenris and Valdris united. Everything you've worked for, everything you've stolen and schemed for, and in the end, the true heir was created by the bond you tried so hard to prevent." Cain's composure shattered completely. The dark magic around him flared, reaching for her with hungry tendrils. I'll take your power anyway. I don't need the child. I can drain you directly. It will be agonizing, but at least I'll enjoy watching you scream." The magic hit her like a wave of fire. Serafina did scream. She couldn't help it. The sensation of her power being torn from her body was worse than anything Cain had ever done to her physically. Golden light poured from her skin, flooding into him, and she felt herself diminishing with every passing second. But she didn't fight the drain. She pushed. Every ounce of power her wolf had accumulated over 12 years of being caged, every moment of rage and grief and desperate hope that she'd buried deep inside, she gathered it all and shoved it through the connection Cain had created. "What?" Cain's voice cracked. His eyes went wide. "What are you doing? Stop, stop!" He couldn't close the channel. He'd designed the ritual to be greedy, to take everything it could reach. Now that greed was killing him. Alpha energy flooded into Cain. Pure, wild, ancient power that had been building for 12 years without release. It was too much for any wolf to absorb safely, let alone one who had gained his strength through dark magic and stolen essence. His body began to glow from within, cracks of golden light appearing in his skin like fissures in breaking stone. "You can't," he staggered, smoke rising from his flesh. "This power is mine. This power was never yours." Serafina advanced on him, still pushing, still pouring everything she had into the man who had destroyed her family. "You stole it, murdered for it, tortured a child for it, and now it's going to burn you alive," Cain screamed. The sound was inhuman, terrible, the death cry of something that had stopped being a wolf long ago. Golden fire erupted from his eyes, his mouth, the cracks spreading across his body. He was burning from the inside out, consumed by the very power he had spent 12 years trying to claim. In his final moments, he lunged for her. His hand closed around her throat, fingers tightening with desperate strength. "If I die," his voice was barely recognizable, torn apart by the fire consuming him, "I'm taking you with me." Claws erupted from his chest. Cain's grip went slack. His eyes, still burning, still screaming, found the face that appeared over Serafina's shoulder. Theron, bloodied, barely standing, but there. "You don't get to touch her." Theron's voice was a snarl, his claws buried deep in Cain's spine. "You never got to touch her, not really." He twisted, and something inside Cain shattered with a sound like breaking glass. "She was never yours." Cain tried to speak. No words came. The golden fire had reached his core now, eating away everything that made him human, everything that made him anything. He crumbled. Not fell. Crumbled. His body collapsed into ash that scattered across the ritual chamber floor, carried by a wind that seemed to come from nowhere. The dark magic died with him, runes going dark, the hungry crimson light fading into nothing. Serafina's knees buckled. Theron caught her before she could fall, his arms wrapping around her with desperate gentleness. "Sarah, I'm all right." She wasn't sure if that was true, but it was what he needed to hear. "I'm all right. It's over." Deep inside her, freed at last from every chain and binding, her wolf threw back its head and howled. The sound shook the chamber, shook the palace above, shook the very foundations of a kingdom that had been built on blood and lies. It was the howl of victory, the howl of freedom, the howl of a queen finally come home. The kingdom burned, but it rebuilt. The weeks that followed Cain's death were chaos, his allies fleeing or fighting, his secrets being exposed one by one, the careful lies he'd constructed collapsing under the weight of truth. Some packs resisted the revelation that their beloved beta commander had been a monster. Others embraced it, grateful for an explanation of the unease they'd always felt around him. The truth about Serafina's identity spread like wildfire. The lost princess of the Fenris bloodline, believed dead for 12 years, found alive and carrying the heir who would unite both dynasties. Some called it miracle, some called it manipulation. But when she stood before the Council of Alphas and shifted, when she became the massive white wolf, strong and glorious after months of recovery and proper nourishment and the healing that came from finally being safe, when her alpha gold eyes swept across the assembled leaders and her power washed over them like a wave, no one could deny her claim. They ruled together, not just as mates but as equals, 2 thrones, 2 crowns, 2 voices that carried the same weight. Seraphina was not Theron's queen. She was a queen in her own right, reclaiming the seat that had been stolen when she was a child, barely old enough to understand what she'd lost. She learned statecraft with the same fierce determination she'd applied to survival. Theron taught her what he could, but most of it she discovered herself, reading old treaties, questioning advisors, building alliances through a combination of sharp intelligence and the particular understanding that came from having suffered. The wolves who had been oppressed, forgotten, dismissed, they found in her a champion who knew exactly what it meant to be powerless and exactly how that powerlessness could be transformed into strength. The scars remained. Healers offered to erase them. Magic could smooth away the evidence of Cain's cruelty, could give her skin as unmarked as any noblewoman's. She refused every time. "These are mine," she said. "I earned them." Theron understood. He never suggested she hide them, never flinched when his fingers traced the silver lines across her back. If anything, he touched them with reverence, a warrior acknowledging another warrior's battle marks. Their son was born at the winter solstice, in a chamber filled with moonlight and the low hum of pack members keeping vigil outside the door. He came into the world screaming, furious at being evicted from his warm sanctuary, tiny fists already swinging at whatever enemy had disturbed his peace. "He has your temper," Theron said, wonder in his voice as he held his son for the first time. Seraphina laughed, a real laugh, full and bright and nothing like the brittle sounds she'd learned to make during her captivity. "He has your stubbornness. Look at that jaw." The child did have Theron's jaw, that determined set that suggested he would grow into a man who didn't back down from anything. But his eyes, when they opened, were pure gold. Alpha gold. Fenris gold. The Pax called him the Bridge Prince, the child who united 2 dynasties. The heir who buried the blood feud before it could ever begin. Seraphina called him Fenris, after the grandfather he would never know. The grandfather whose death had set everything in motion, whose kingdom had burned so that this moment could eventually exist. "My father would have loved you," she whispered to her son on his naming day, watching him watch her with those ancient knowing eyes. "He would have bounced you on his knee and told you stories about wolves who could eat the moon. He would have taught you to hunt and to lead and to love your people with your whole heart." The baby gurgled, grabbing for the silver chain around her neck. "But he's not here, so I'll tell you those stories instead. I'll teach you everything he would have taught me, if I'd had the chance to learn." She looked up and found Theron watching from the doorway, the same awed devotion in his eyes that had been there since the night he found her in that bathroom, bleeding and broken and somehow still alive. "Your scars," he said quietly, crossing to kneel beside her. His fingers found the marks on her arm, tracing them with familiar tenderness. "They're the most beautiful part of you." Seraphina smiled, a real smile, the kind she'd forgotten how to make for 12 years, the kind that came from somewhere deep inside, from a well of joy she'd thought had been poisoned forever. "I know," she said, and she did. The scars were her story. They said she'd walked through fire and kept breathing. They said she'd faced a monster and won. They said that survival wasn't just endurance, it was strength and power, and the foundation on which kingdoms could be built. Outside the window, the winter sun climbed higher. Somewhere in the palace, the Pax were gathering for the naming ceremony. A new era was beginning, born from the ashes of 12 years of suffering and the stubborn, impossible hope of a woman who had refused to break. Serafina gathered her son in her arms and rose to meet her people. She was a queen, a survivor, a wolf who had burned the world that tried to cage her and built something better from the flames. And this was only the beginning. Years later, when historians wrote about the reign of the twin thrones, they always started the same way. Once upon a time, a king heard a sound in the darkness, a broken whimper, so small that any ordinary wolf would have missed it. But he wasn't ordinary. And neither was the woman he found. The rest, as they say, is legend. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe, like, and share this video to continue listening to this type of story daily, and also to appreciate this community too. I would like to hear your wonderful opinion about this story. Please comment below.